But today I'm going to be talking specifically about peer support. And I think peer support is at the heart of a recovery-focused organisation, recovery-focused service. I think that once we start to employ people with lived experience within services, they really do start to drive forward a change in culture. They start to change the attitudes of the other staff, and they really change the expectations of people using services. When I was in Arizona, the peers there wear this T-shirt, "I am the evidence." And really that says it all, you know. People who are working as peer workers and have their own mental health problems are evidence that recovery happens.
I forgot to say that you will access these slides.
Yeah, you can have copies of these slides. The best way to understand peer support and the power of peer support is to really think about your own experience, to think about times when things have been really bad for you, and to think about who's been most helpful for you. So for me, at times when I'm at my most frightened, my most convinced that I could never ever get back onto life, when everybody else seems to find life so easy, and yet there are times, aren't there, when you can't imagine being able to walk down the street and laugh and hold your kids' hands with confidence. And it's really difficult to explain to people how that feels. It's hard to find the words to tell a professional what it feels like to be in this state. And I don't know about you, but for me, when you tell your psychiatrist what's going on, you can't really believe that they understand what you're saying. And the problem is that because you are somebody, and for me, you know, I was first admitted when I was 19. It's a long time ago. And so every time that I either become a bit tearful, a bit angry, a bit giggly, it's always, you know, oh my goodness, is she starting to go mad again? You know, is she taking her tablets? People do treat you differently once you've got a diagnosis of mental health problems. So you have to contend with that. And the real challenge is that when things are at their worst, you just can't believe that you're going to get through this. And you can't imagine there'll be a time when you can actually trust that you will be able to do the same things as other people. But then somebody comes along who says, it sounds as though you feel very much how I did a couple of years ago. And they say, you know, I was on this ward. Only 12 months ago, I was sectioned, I was on this ward and I was taking the same medication as you. And you know, you look at them and you think, how could that possibly be that you could have felt as bad as this and now you're up and about and working? Or else somebody, without even saying as much as that they've had the same experience, they'll say some words that make you realise they understand. And for me, it's like, you know, when things are absolutely horrendous and somebody sat beside me and they said, it's hard just to merely exist, isn't it? And you look at them and you think, God, you do understand. And that's what peer support is. You actually see that somebody does understand, they have been in the same position as you, and much more than that, they are now, well, they're working, they're managing their life, they're managing their symptoms, they're coping. And that's the power of peer support. And you don't have to have mental health problems to understand that. You know, whether you've struggled with a bereavement or with a long-term physical health condition or with suddenly losing your job, the people who really help are other people who've been through similar things, aren't they? And I think that just meeting someone who can put into words how you're feeling and who's got some ideas about how you might get to where they are today. It's not just the fact that they exist, they've got there, which is important in itself, but also the fact that they can say, you know, I found it helpful doing this, this and this. For me, sleep was the most important thing. You know, they've got these ideas and you think, ah, I could try that too. So that's what peer support is. It is about people who don't just have lived experience of mental health problems, but they're they're open about it. They explicitly draw on that to inform the way they work, the kind of support they give, the things they say. They're people who literally, because they say, I was on this ward a year ago, do you know, I had that diagnosis, but then it was changed to this. You know, the thing that I found hardest was the panic attacks. You know, the people who say things like that, who explicitly convey hope that things will get better for you too. And the important thing is that these people need to be far enough in their own recovery to be able to reflect on what it is that's helped them. So peer support does happen informally all the time. Every day we meet people who'll say, you know, I find this helpful, I find that helpful. But actually employing peer support workers, one of the things that's important is making sure that they are ready for this job, that they've actually moved on in their recovery to an extent where they know what keeps them well. They can look back and say, this is what got me into that state, and actually I've learned about how to manage this condition now. And I guess the important thing as well is when you employ peer workers, they're often people who just know that peer support is incredibly important. I've just met somebody just now who's telling me that her story has inspired so many people. Yeah, I'm looking at you now. You know, just by saying to people, you know, you didn't believe that people with schizophrenia could get through and work full time. Well, here I am. And actually you need to hear about me because you need to believe that every single person with the same diagnosis as me could still be in this position, same as me. So peer support is absolutely about conveying a belief in every human being. And it's not for the exceptional, it's not for those people who are different. And so often when I'm training peer workers and members of staff from the wards will say, but these are different from the people on our ward, you know, these are special, these people are. And I'll say, how many people in this room have actually been a patient on an inpatient ward? And they'll all put their hands up. They're not different. Yeah, everybody has, there's a lot of people in this room who have. So I'd say that, you know, this is not, peer support work is not for the special few, the select few. This is for, it's an opportunity for everybody to demonstrate that you can recover, you can get work. So one of the things that's important around peer support is that we keep on researching it. We keep on finding out what difference it makes. And these words that I'll keep using are the words of peer workers in a research project which we did at Nottingham. So, you know, just asking peer support workers, so what do you do? How do you make a difference? And this is what one person said. Well, they know I'm not the expert. They know that we're just us, both trying to beat the same demons, and we're trying to work things through together. So this isn't one person having all the answers and the other person being passive and taking the advice. This is about two people working together. And then this one's very nice. I said to her, I've got my own experience of mental illness. I've been on the ward myself and so on. And with that, she sort of jumped up and gave me this huge bear hug. And people who are going through it will look at you and say, you do actually know where I'm coming from. That breaks down so much. That breaks down so many problems. So what I want to do today is to talk a bit about how we've brought peer support into the services across England and what difference that makes. And how does it make a difference? In the words of the peer support workers, how do they think it makes a difference? And how do we keep peer support true to peer support? How do we stop peer support workers just becoming the same as the other staff? Of course, that's a risk, isn't it? If you introduce people into a service, then they just start to work according to traditional principles. We need to think about how we stop that. I'm just going to say a bit about how much peer support has developed around the world, because it is going on everywhere, and talk about some common challenges that we're finding and how we're overcoming them. So what we're talking about here is not naturally occurring peer support, which you'll probably all be aware of, where you meet a friend who tells you about some common challenge which they're facing in their life, whether it's bringing up their children, whether it's getting up early to get to work, whatever. That's naturally occurring peer support where we support one another in day-to-day practice. What I'm talking about is intentional peer support, where we actually employ people with lived experience in our services and we pay them for doing the job. And that role is about explicitly using their own experiences to support other people. That's how it differs from staff. A lot of staff say to me, but I've used services too. And I'll say, so do you talk about that? Do you use it every day? No, they use their nursing training or their social work training or whatever. But this is about people, their main source of expertise is their own experience. And these people can work in a variety of roles. They might work as volunteers, they might have an internship, which means they get work experience. They might be paid, but the important thing is that they need to have lived experience and they need to be using that lived experience in their work. So there's been a fair bit of research, not really high quality research, but there has been research into peer support. And if you go onto the IMROC website, if you just Google IMROC, you'll find a review of the evidence there and also some practical guidance about implementing peer support. But if you pull together all of the research that's been going on around the world, you could say that at the very least, peer support doesn't harm people. And for some people, that's a surprise in itself. They'll say, you know, for goodness sake, employing mad people in our ward, you know, that'll be terrible. But actually, it doesn't harm anybody. But in the main, the research shows that it actually improves the lives of people who are supported. I'll tell you a bit more about that. It actually does have an influence on the overarching culture, you know, the conversations, the way that people work, the kind of policies, documentation, paperwork. The culture changes because of peer support workers. There is evidence that it's cheaper to employ peer workers in your teams because actually they will accelerate people's recovery. People won't stay in the services long because they will recover more quickly. And interestingly, it does just as much good to the peer support workers as it does to the people they're supporting. Peer support workers themselves recover very quickly when they're doing this job. So if I just talk a bit more about these, the people who peer support workers offer support to feel more empowered. They believe in themselves that they will recover. They meet somebody who has recovered, they hear about how they've done it, and they start to believe the possibility of recovery for themselves. And what they also say is, I just felt as though someone understood me, someone kind of liked me for who I am. And that's quite an important aspect of peer support. The relationship is more supportive and empowering. People who are supported by peer workers are definitely more hopeful. One of the most consistent findings is that when people have a peer support worker, they genuinely believe in their own possibilities. And interestingly, again and again, we see that people who have peer support are not admitted as often or for so long. And that results in cost benefits because obviously it's inpatient days which cost all the money. So if you're providing peer support, then the cost of services used will be reduced. And what's incredibly interesting is that, you know, there are some groups who find services very difficult to access. So people from gypsies and travellers groups, people from different minority ethnic groups, people who have experienced trauma and abuse in their lives often find it very difficult to access services, to use services, but they will accept support from peer support workers. So all of the benefits which I've described are enhanced in people from excluded groups. So how does that happen? Well, in the words of the peer support workers, I want to be able to show people that however low you go down, there's a way up and there's a way out. And that's what peer support workers do. They show that this is possible. I just want to help people kind of realise what's important for them, not what's important for me. And that's really important, is that peers don't try to constantly impose their own experience, their own goals, their own solutions on others, but they help people identify their own goals and their own solutions. And the thing I try to install is, no matter where you are, if you want to get somewhere else, you can. There's always a route to where you want to be. Are you going to do something about the squeaking?
Yes.
That would be good.
I think this is going to be better.
Well done. Oh, that's better because I'm getting further away from it. Okay, so these peers are starting to explain how this happens. And you can see that what they want to get through more than anything is recovery's possible. But actually, when you dig down a bit, so how do they do that? It isn't just by telling their own story. We train peer support workers in all kinds of different ways of working, so they can start to help people develop recovery plans, RAP plans, wellness recovery action plans. Peer support workers are trained in problem-solving skills. They're trained in coaching skills. So none of these are directive, they're not therapies or treatments, but they are ways of working with people to help those people to find their own solutions, to find their own goals. And peers can sort of keep on supporting them in achieving them. Peer support does improve the lives of peer support workers, and they repeatedly talk about having more confidence, more self-esteem. They are empowered, they believe in their own future, their own possibility. And of course, there's all the benefits of it being in paid employment. You know, you have money, you have social structures, you've got colleagues and friends who you meet every day. And the great thing is that peer support workers can start to get back into work in a place where they don't have to hide their experience of mental health problems, where they can use this experience in a positive way and make something positive out of something which has often been very negative. And they can start to plan their future, whether they want to stay in peer support, but very often they move beyond service. There comes a point when they say, actually, you know, I now have proved to myself I can work, I've done what I can, I now want to go and train as a social worker or a nurse, I want to go and work as a teacher. And that's fine, because actually peer support workers are at their most effective when their experience is quite recent. And so, of course, being a peer support worker progresses their personal recovery. They learn skills and they learn more about recovery. And a lot of that's because you actually learn a lot from the people you're working with. It's not just a one-way journey. Peer support workers will learn from people they support. And here we have some peers talking about why this works. First and foremost, I find it a really fulfilling job. I look forward to work every day, planning my own diary and supporting people in what they do. And then I work hard to keep myself well now. I've got a reason to look after myself better. And when you're driving to visit somebody and you're helping them work towards their goals, and you just think, how cool is this? I can't believe I get paid for it. And it's made a real big difference to me, you know, just contributing something to them. You know, you're hopefully changing their lives for the better. And that's just amazing, isn't it? For many of these peers, it's very, very moving hearing them say, you know, I was worth nothing. I felt I was going nowhere. My life was over. And then they become really emotional when they say, but you know, the people I go and help, they say they really value me. And you can see these peers growing as people and growing their own life back. The other thing about peer support, and I think this is really important, is that you start introducing peer support workers into your wards or in your community teams, and those teams will change. So peers will help to communicate on behalf of patients. They'll start to say, no, what's really frustrating this person is this, you know, in a kind of advocacy kind of way. But also, they can bring a whole lot more skills that the team hasn't got time to give. So the team might say, you know, we'd love everybody on the ward to have a RAP plan, or we'd love to run a recovery group, or we'd love to do some employment support, but we haven't got time. Those are the things that a peer support worker might be able to do. or somebody who's really stuck in their own recovery. They're not able to think about, you know, a patient who's just very static, not able to think what to do next, feeling very hopeless. Actually, some really intensive sessional work with peer support workers can help them to really think about what they want from their future. And that coaching approach, rather than a treatment or therapy approach, but an approach which is about coaching and helping them to work out what they want their life to be about, is the kind of approach they take. The other thing is that when you've got a team of staff who have worked with people when they've been at their most distressed and they're most disturbed and they're most disabled, they lose sight often of what's possible for these people. So actually suddenly to have peer workers in there who have been on that ward, who have been very disturbed and distressed, changes the staff attitudes. They become much more hopeful, less discriminating, less limited in their views about what's possible. And so, of course, we break down the barriers between us and them, because what we find is that a lot of the staff suddenly start to talk about their own experiences. So staff who've never said a thing about the fact that they had postnatal depression, that actually they take sleeping tablets, that they have panic attacks, that they have a son who's also got a diagnosis of schizophrenia, suddenly they start to talk about these things with the peer workers. And then, before we know it, the team is coming, say, to me and saying, you know, we actually are saying that all of the staff on the team would like to have a wellness recovery action plan. Every single member of staff wants to have their own recovery plan. And also, could we have some training, please, for staff to talk about how they can disclose, how they can use their lived experience in their work? And so now we run four-day training course for staff, and it's called Bringing Your Personal and, what's it called? Personal and lived experience. So life and lived experience. So bringing life and lived experience into your practice. That's what it is. So we're saying to staff, yeah, but we're interested in your lived experience of mental health problems. But as well as that, we're interested in the fact that you're a good footballer, that you love music, that you were a hairdresser. All these things are important.
Should we move it? You need to stand closer to the microphone.
I think it might be a splash. If I get closer, it seems to be noisier. So shall I sit down here? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Actually, rather you should turn it in that direction, away from the student.
Ah.
Like that, and then you can stand a bit more this. Like that. You have to look at the slide. And action. Yeah.
Oh, I've lost my flow. No. Okay.
Is the computer there?
No, we're fine. We're fine. I'm just fine. What I want to say, though, is that I've been telling you all the good stuff about peer support, but so my job involves working nationally to try to train peers for all different services, and about, I'd say, 3/4 of mental health organisations in England now do employ peers. But I also work 2 days a week in a service in Nottingham where we're trying to kind of test out these ideas and really try to take them forward. And I'd say that we have more peer support workers in Nottingham than anywhere else, and they do work in all parts of the service, but it's not easy. You know, this is really, it's a really tricky job to try and, it is hard to support peers to stay well in work in an organisation which is quite ambivalent about what they think about peers. And it's also quite hard to keep the peers from saying, we're the only people who could actually do this. We could run the world. Because actually, that's what they start to feel like, because life has got so much better for them that to some extent we're going, don't say that though, because the other staff will think, you know, they'll feel very threatened if you tell them that you're the only people who can do this. So just, you know, hang on to that a bit. So there are challenges, and we have to be absolutely clear about what the role of a peer support worker is. And everybody on that team needs to know what the peer does, how they differ from them. And most importantly, you know, if they're employed in a paid job, they have the same code of conduct, they have the same disciplinary rules, they have the same employment contract. You know, they too only get this many days holiday, they only get this many days sickness, you know, everything is the same. Why wouldn't it be? And interestingly, you know, we did a survey of all of the staff. I think there's 9,500 staff in Nottinghamshire Healthcare Trust. 42% of staff, not peers, 42% of professional staff have used mental health services. I bet you find the same here, because a lot of people who go into mental health are going there because of some lived experience. We've repeated that in 5 big organisations, and it's between 38 and 62% of staff are saying they've experienced mental health services. Now, where does that place your peer support workers? Now, we'd say the peer support workers are the brave ones, because they are coming forward and saying, I'm using this lived experience primarily in my work, whereas the staff are still using their professional expertise. But of course, that's a question which we haven't yet solved yet. Does there come a day when we don't need peer support worker posts? Everybody uses their lived experience and their life experience in their work. So one of the challenges for us is always the staff saying, what about me then? Hey? I use that service, and I don't get all of the fuss and bother and all of the, you know, the rewards that a peer support worker get. You know, they go off and do special training. Everybody says they're wonderful. I've been doing this for years. We say, but, you know, how do you bring your lived experience to bear on the lives of the people using your service? And that's what we want to enable all staff to do, is to bring their lived experience to improve the lives of patients using the service. I think one of the biggest challenges is trying to ensure that our peer workers, we have about 50 at the moment. Doesn't sound very many, but it's hard won. And as soon as you get up to 50, somebody leaves, and then you've got to make sure you keep that post open for another peer. But the challenge is to try to ensure that these peers continue to work in this very inspirational, recovery-focused way, when they're in a team that often is not working in that way, that can be fairly negative and a bit limiting and quite uninspiring. And we want the peer to kind of lift the team rather than the team to pull down the peer. And that can be quite hard. And we do a lot of supervision. So we bring in, supervision comes from other peers. And we also every month have a peer development day. So all of our peers come together to support one another and focus on an area of development. I think one of the biggest challenges as well is about boundaries in relationships. So many of our peer support workers are friends at home, friends away from work, with people who are patients on the wards they're working in. And yet, we're saying to them, you know, you may be a peer and not a professional, but there are still things about your life and about you that we think you need to keep safe. You need to keep those to yourself. So we have to do a lot of training around what we call circles of safety. So what you feel confident about sharing and what you really do need to keep safe for yourself. And in every conversation, are you using your lived experience? Are you talking about yourself to help the other person or to help yourself? And you must always ask yourself that question. Am I talking about this because I need you to know this about me? Or am I talking about it because I think it will help you? And those boundaries and the boundary training is important, but also supervision needs to constantly focus on that because it's easy to slip. I think the other thing is in England that there are lots of different factions forming around peer support. So there are voluntary sector groups, self-help groups saying peer support workers should never work in health services, they should only work in the voluntary sector. You know, they should never get involved in restraining patients, you should never get involved in any conversations about medication. And those questions are very interesting, and I don't think there's a definite answer to an awful lot of these questions, but I suppose from my point of view, what we're doing is never saying we know the answers, but always thinking always thinking and developing what we think might be the right way of going on. We're nowhere near, you know, we're learning still very, very fast. So one of the things that we can do that really helps us to stick with peer support and to be sure that wherever they're working, in whatever type of service, whether it's a voluntary sector service, a social service, a health service, one of the things that helps is to know that we are sticking with those characteristics which define peer support. There's a lot of different people come up with these characteristics. Scottish Recovery Network, Arizona, Recovery Innovations, together in England, and some research going on at the moment with Stephen Gillard. They're all coming up with different characteristics, but these are the characteristics which have come up from research which I've done with peer support workers in Nottingham, and we're using it in our training across England. The first one is mutuality, and this is about sharing experience. The core of peer support is about sharing experience. It's demonstrating that we have something in common, whether that is a shared experience of feeling very frightened, very guilty, feeling overwhelmed, whatever it might be. We can share that experience, and we can also not just share the bad bits, but also share the good bits. We can share how we've coped, how have we managed those experiences. And sharing is part of this difficulty. How much you share, who you share it with, when you share it, how you share it, is all part of making a judgment, which has to be based on exactly what you're doing and who with at that moment in time. You have to make a judgment, and so training is quite important to help people think through how you make that judgment. It can be really hard when you're overwhelmed with your own sense of what worked for you and you want to tell someone, what you need to do is this. And what we'd say is to really hang on and think carefully about how you use your own experience. So that's mutuality. And the second one, very obvious, is that peer support is recovery focused. And we would define recovery shorthand as being inspiring hope, enabling people to take back control, and enabling people to access opportunities to do the things they want to do. So every interaction a peer support worker has needs to be inspiring hope, control, and opportunity. The other thing about peer workers is that they often come from the same communities as the people who are using the service. You know, they live within that community, that's where they're coming from. And so in a really good position to help people re-engage with activities, roles, relationships, resources in that community. And peers need to be constantly thinking, how can we help people to re-engage with the worlds that are important to them? And that's important, again, in terms of training, because what we found early on was that peers, first of all, wanted to create a fantastic relationship with the people they supported. And those relationships were so good that they didn't want to lose them. And we really struggled with how do we discharge people, because they'd become such good friends. And what we have to train peers is, but this isn't a job that's about making friends. This is a job about you helping people to make friends with other people out there, not becoming their friends. So community facing is a lot about thinking about who and what can people be helped to engage with out there in the communities. Reciprocity, I thought, well, I struggle with this word, so I don't know how you deal with this in your language, but this is about giving and taking. You know, this isn't just about, it's not just about me as a peer support worker being a fantastic source of strength and therapy and treatment. It's about working together to find solutions. It's about sharing ideas. It's absolutely about giving and taking. I've said that peers need to be quite a long way ahead in their recovery journey in order to be strong enough to be peer workers. But at the same time, they're still in a wonderful position to learn from the people they support. They need to be able to say, that's a good idea, that'll really help me, you know, like, so you do this, and learn from that person. So the person they're supporting is able to contribute, not just be somebody who has on the receiving end of help all the time. Peer support workers talk all the time about actually learning new skills, finding new places to go in the community, actually learning from the people they support. And the other thing is that peers are because they're very used to those big feelings, big overwhelming feelings of fear, or just generally of being overwhelmed. They're not frightened when somebody else comes back with those feelings. So when somebody comes to me and says, you know, I'm thinking about death every day of my life, I'm not going to go, we need to get you locked up. I'm going to go, it's horrendous when times are like that. It's horrendous when you wake up every morning and think, why am I still here? But I'm not frightened by it. We know what it's like, don't we, to have been in those situations. And so to share that and to normalize that can be really helpful. I think that it's only when you get somebody who really does believe and know where you've been that you can really start to work together to generate solutions. And two heads are better than one. So together you can start to think, so what is it that's going to change where I think you are now? And that's how peer support can work through this reciprocal relationship. And of course, as with all recovery-focused support, peer support is very much based on people's strengths. We're not focusing on all the things they can't do, their disabilities, their deficits, their dysfunctions, but thinking about what they can do. What are their skills? What are their qualities? What have they experienced? And how often do you meet people who say, but I haven't got any. There's nothing I'm good at. And you listen to their life and you think, my God, you know, it's a miracle you even still exist. So that's your strength, is that you're resilient. You've stuck in there and you're still here, even though life has been so horrendous. So you, as a peer support worker, you're absolutely counting, acknowledging, celebrating people's strengths. But it's really, really important that peer support is safe. And we have to prove, those of us who have experience of mental health problems have to prove to all those skeptical professionals that peer support workers are at least as safe as any one of them. This is in terms, you know, the first thing is that other professionals say is we can't let peers have access to our notes because what about confidentiality? And we would say, well, if anybody knows about the importance of confidentiality, it's those of us whose notes are sitting there in that cupboard. But the other thing is that we do need to keep ourselves safe. And the thing is, when we're talking to people about big experiences, about big emotions, about things like their wish to be dead, it can be very, very difficult for us, and we need to be very clear about what we do with that kind of information to keep ourselves safe, to make sure we're not going home every night worrying about the people we're supporting. And we have to know how much we're willing to talk about ourselves and which bits about ourselves we have to keep quiet and we have to keep safe. So safety is about keeping ourselves safe as well as keeping the other people safe, and knowing absolutely what to do with information that's given to us that we might need to report on. One of the things about peer support is that we don't actually, in the same way as other professionals, we don't go straight away and say so-and-so is expressing suicidal ideas. What we would do is help them to think about what they might do with that and why they're telling you that and that kind of thing. So I think peer support, we would encourage people to be much braver about those open conversations than professionals often are. And then being non-directive, and this is, I think, the hardest thing in the world. How do we always ensure as a peer support worker that we're not giving advice, we're not prescribing certain activities, we're not telling people what to do next, but we are listening. We're using active listening to help people find their own solutions. We might be taking a problem-solving approach to help them generate a range of ideas which might help them. We need to be interested and curious with people so that they keep working through until they come to their own conclusions and make sense of things for themselves. But you know, when things start to go wrong and people start to say, well, this weekend I'm going off on a big binge and I'm going to do this, that and the other, and then I'm going to chuck the key to my flat in the river. And you feel like, no, don't do that. And actually what we're doing is saying, I'm just wondering why you're telling me that, because I'm feeling really worried now you've told me that, you know. So it is always around helping them to think through what they're doing, what they're saying, rather than telling them what to do. I'm nearly at the end of these, okay. Person-centered. This makes a lot of sense to us all because this is about being absolutely individual. Our approach is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It is literally about listening to every person, remembering their stories and all of the details of their particular situation. And being sure that our own experience is not exactly the same as anybody else's. So what works for us doesn't necessarily work for another person. But absolutely working with that person to identify their own goals, their own supports, their own steps to get to where they want to be. And finally, peer support isn't a friendship which goes on and on and on and on forever. This is a progressive relationship where we're helping people to move forwards in their lives. If you want to have a friend, get a friend or a befriender or somebody, you know, that is a different relationship. But I think peer support, if we're looking to get funding for peer posts, we need to be seeing them as people who can actively help people to move forward in their recovery. And so that is about being in a kind of professional role, not just in a friend role. And one of the things that helps in this is to say, well, you have a peer support worker for a set limited length of time. Say you have a peer support worker for 6 weeks. So in some of our inpatient wards, they have peer support workers who just work with people over the discharge period. So 2 weeks before discharge and then 4 weeks in the community. Just 6 weeks to set them up in the community. And that then makes the peers free to start with somebody else after that. We've had to develop this because we learned very early on that actually peers are fantastic friends that people value so much they don't want to let them go. So right from the beginning you need to be quite clear that this is a short-term relationship to help you make other friends and relationships and do different things. So you're not the only country interested in developing peer support. It's happening everywhere. It's the biggest growing new role in the UK and the United States. And all across Europe, we've trained, so I've been involved in IMROC, which is an organisation which promotes recovery, and we've trained peer support workers in Italy, and we've offered support for training in Sweden when I went down to Malmo, Norway, France, Switzerland, and also developed peer workers in Uganda, which is really interesting because they don't have many other supports in Uganda. We have peer support workers working in Japan, in Hong Kong and in Asia, and I'm back there for 2 weeks in a couple of weeks' time doing some more work there. Quite separately, there's, and I think you're going to see peer support workers in New Zealand, Australia, and there's been a big movement forward there, which probably preceded United States and United Kingdom developments. And I'd say that everywhere you go, you hear the same stories and you see very similar things happening. It isn't remarkably different. In England, we don't have a national accreditation of peer support because actually I've been really clear that we're not ready yet. We're not quite sure exactly what they need to be trained in. And so we've pushed back on that. But there are national accreditation systems in America and in Australia. And we do have some local accreditation in United Kingdom and in Italy. And then the other thing is that at Yale University, they've started a peer leadership academy to try to get some international leadership standards around peer support. So people with lived experience actually being sort of singled out to provide a lead for the development of mental health services and development of peer support. So things are happening very quickly. I probably think the most impressive service in the world is Recovery Innovations in Arizona, where I did my initial training, and they have about 75% of their staff are peer support workers, and they have a ban on any kind of restraint. They don't use seclusion, they don't use forced medication, and they don't restrain people. And they haven't done that for about 8 years. So if you want to find more about that, look up Recovery Innovations. But lots and lots of questions, and I'm finishing on this slide. I think you have to think about, where are you going to employ peer support workers? Are they going to be in social services, health services, in the voluntary sector? And what are they going to be doing? You need to be clear about how they're going to complement the roles of existing teams, and what kind of training are they going to be offered? What sort of career pathway? I'm quite opposed, actually, quite contentiously. I don't think peer support workers should actually, because you've got lived experience, you then get onto a career pathway up to the top of an organisation. My feeling is you get to a point where you can apply for the same jobs as other professionals. How are you going to provide enough support and supervision? And what are you going to do about all those staff who say, but I've got lived experience, and so what does this mean for me? Are they going to be called peers too? So I'd say that it is very well worth investing in peer support, because they really do change things. They really do shift the culture of services. They shift attitudes within services. And they do improve the experience and outcomes of people using services. But they're not a cheap option. They can only be part of an overarching strategy. They're much more successful in a service that's already quite recovery focused. And if they're going to be successful, you need to invest a lot of care, a lot of thought, and a lot of time. Thank you.